Hi, Mrs. Morrison. How's it going?
Hi, good, thank you. And yourself?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today to discuss the economic transition and how you manage an investment strategy that is essentially based on that. And so let's start by discussing what exactly is meant by economic transition, and what a better place to begin than to talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. What can you tell us about those, Mrs. Morrison?
Okay, well, first, it's a pleasure to be asked to speak to you today. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And then turning to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these were really created for governments. They're a series of 17 social and environmental goals. And it was really creating a framework to highlight what the challenges were from a sustainable development perspective, and to create a framework for governments to be able to measure their progress against those goals. And over the last few years, investors have become increasingly interested in trying to understand the extent to which their investments are actually contributing to meeting some of those goals. The biggest exposures for us are good health and well-being, SDG number 3, decent work and economic growth, SDG number 8, and then finally, innovation, industry and infrastructure, which is SDG number 9. And we've got just short of 60% alignment, but we're only including those areas that relate to emerging markets, SME companies, least developed nations, leapfrogging technologies, gaps in insurance coverage, prevention of disease. We're being quite careful and conservative, and we think that that is an appropriate approach to take.
And so now let's take that step back and talk to us about what is meant by an economic transition. How do you at Impax see such economic transition taking place in the coming years? And I guess it has started already.
Impax's investment philosophy is actually based on the belief that the economy is in transition to a more sustainable economy. And there are 4 key drivers here, which we believe are creating that pressure for change. One is social factors. So more people on the planet living longer, rising living standards, putting pressure on finite resources. A growing awareness of the issues has led to changes in consumer preferences. And this is consumers actually seeking out more sustainable products. And then the magnitude of the problems has driven government regulation. Governments are recognizing the link between the state of their economy, the health of the citizens, and the environment, and they're wanting to win votes. They can see the movement, the rising interest in some of these issues, and so regulation is coming in to support some of this transition. And then finally, technology, where we've seen development of solutions. Innovation has been driving down the costs of some of these solutions and making them more affordable. And that's in turn allowing consumers to actually afford to make a more sustainable environmental choice. And this is actually developing a positive cycle of change. And so we see this as very positive. Now, in the listed equity context, we mean by sustainability, it really refers to what a company does. What products and services does that company produce? Do they benefit from the transition to a more sustainable economy? Are they providing solutions to help that transition? Are they benefiting from those changing patterns as the transition unfolds? And are they themselves reducing their net carbon footprint, reducing their water demand, creating circular economies in their products, recycling, reusing, sharing? And we're really looking for companies that can manage their transition risks and benefit from those transition opportunities, where they're seeing structural growth drivers rather than being hit by the disruption of new entrants eating their lunch. So we're looking for companies that can be part of the solution and avoid companies that we think are part of the problem.
Because I guess there's a limit to which governments and regulations can help that transition. At one point, private capital has to get involved.
So what we've seen during COVID is a much sharper acceleration towards the adoption of electric vehicles than had been expected. The direction of travel was set, but the speed of adoption has really changed. And it's where government and private market capital can come into play, with government maybe doing some of the early heavy lifting and then private markets providing the solutions and bringing the capital in as you reach commercial scale. And I think it's this, they can work together, but you do need, in the electrification of the grid, you're going to need private capital to come in and provide part of the investment to help the government with the heavy lifting of the transition that's ahead.
And so that whole transition is providing that underlying theme, let's say, that supports your investment strategy. So why don't we get into that? What's your investment philosophy? What do you look for in companies?
Yeah, so as I was saying, we believe at the core of our investment process is the belief of the transition to a more sustainable economy. And I've described a couple of transitions, the move from from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. You've also got the move away from unhealthy food ingredients towards healthier food ingredients. In all of these transitions, there are winners and losers. And another way of thinking about that is that there are risks and opportunities associated with the transition, and it's a complex landscape. And to help us navigate that complex landscape, we created what we internally call a sustainability lens. And it really just helps us create a framework, not dissimilar to the Sustainable Development Goal framework, but a framework that we believe is more applicable to private sector companies. And what we're looking at is which of those companies operating in different parts of the economy have an attractive balance of risk and opportunity, who has fewer transition risks and more transition opportunities. And the lens directs us to interesting areas of the economy where there might be an opportunity to invest before other investors recognize the potential. And so we're looking for the combination of attractive business model fundamentals, attractive valuation, and combining that with the alignment to the transition that we think is going to provide us with longer term structural growth. And as part of all of that, we integrate ESG, considerations of environmental, social, and governance factors into our analysis. And I think a way for helping investors untangle all these different words is that sustainability refers to what a company does, what it's doing, what it's making, and ESG refers to how it does it. Does it have a light environmental footprint? Does it look after its workers and its stakeholders? Is it considering its material risks and managing those appropriately? And is it taking advantage of the opportunities that open up to it in the transition to make sure that it maximizes its growth potential whilst minimizing some of the disruptive risk and forces that may be at play?
Can you give us some examples of those models or companies that you find interesting?
We have an outsourced R&D company that is looking at the assets and helping companies find those early assets, the potential drugs of the future. We've got a company doing the clinical trials and bringing data and analytics into finding patient populations quicker and having centers of hubs of concentration so that it's cheaper. And then we've got the drug manufacturing companies. So we've got this whole value chain. And that is because we are taking a holistic approach to the pressures and what are the solutions. How do companies navigate this new landscape and still earn attractive returns? And what we're doing is investing in solution providers.
Right. Thank you. That was very interesting.
I was just going to give one other example, which is in the digital infrastructure space. So one of the companies that we invest in is Microsoft. So that could be in many different portfolios. But we're investing in it because of the financials, the consistent returns, the growth opportunity. They've seen huge. They said that last year, 2 months, within 2 months, they saw 2 years of digital investment happen. So the run rate of investment accelerated to the point where what would typically have taken 2 years occurred in 2 months. And people had been sitting on the fence and not being sure if they were going to move ahead with investment. And suddenly, with the distributed office, with everyone working from home, there was a massive need to create connectivity, to increase the resilience of everybody's systems, so that the distributed office could function in a resilient way. Now, we invest there because of the cloud services and the products that they sell into the office space that improve productivity. But if we take the cloud aspect first, what that has actually done, the development of the cloud, it's created the democratization of computing power. It has made the cost of innovation, the cost of failure of innovation has come down. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if a young startup wanted to create an app or a product online, they would go and they might be able to get private capital and private investment of maybe $2 million. And a lot of that would go on servers, on computing power. And if their idea failed, if it was too early or too late, that was then done. There was no refill of their capital pot, and they might not have been able to proceed as a IT entrepreneur. Today, instead of buying the computing power, instead of having that huge capex budget, you've switched the renting model. You're renting computing power in the space. It's OPEX, operating expense, not capital expense. And that means the cost of failure has come right down, because if your idea doesn't work, you can afford to move on and start your next idea. And so we have seen this explosion of creativity, of apps, of solutions coming through on digital platforms. And it's really the cloud that has facilitated that transition. Now, that's a large cap. How do we create baskets of interesting companies? We have a smaller holding in another company that is also a key part of digital infrastructure. And again, we invested in it in about a year ago. Instead of having the data centers that Microsoft and other large cloud players might have out in remote locations where electricity is cheap and the temperatures are cool, this is a company that has smaller size data centers in semi-urban locations, and they are neutral. The different data from all of the different providers can pass through them. They're a neutral hub, a neutral exchange. And what it enables is high speed data transfer close to the demand point, so that you're not getting a slowdown, and it's neutral. So they act as a hub. And so they get co-location. You have several renters on your same footprint, which means you get very high returns on your data center. And they are also very green in the energy that they use. They go out of their way to minimize the environmental impact and the energy consumption of their data centers. And we happen to recognize that this was a very attractive area for investment that was part of the digital infrastructure, the backbone of the future. And we invested in it at the end of 2019, just ahead of the huge demand once again of working from home, driving that need to have your urban data centers really driving high quality connections. And so by taking a long-term approach, again, we were able to capitalize on a transition that occurred faster than might otherwise have taken place.
Great. And so that's pretty interesting, what's actually in the portfolio, what you're looking for. Let's talk about what's not in the portfolio. Currently, for instance, oil and gas are not part of the strategy. Is there a point where those large companies could participate or contribute to the transition, or it's not something that's even remotely possible?
Well, I think they're two different things. If we can large oil and gas companies be part of the solution, I think you're definitely seeing some of those companies, what we would call pivot, and recognize the need for moving away from being solely reliant on fossil fuel. There will be a role for fossil fuel for many years to come, but the growth opportunity in fossil fuel is obviously diminishing. And so many of these companies are now looking to pivot towards renewable energy. And so we are investing in a company that is helping those oil and gas companies change. We would rather be involved in the companies consulting and facilitating the change than actually investing in the underlying oil and gas company.
How did the pandemic affect it at all, your strategy or the way you're looking at different industries?
Many companies that have strong ESG characteristics outperformed during the sell-off,
Right.
during the initial down phase triggered by COVID-19. And it was a positive outcome for us. We outperformed during that period, and it was a terrible period, but it was pleasing to see that those companies with strong ESG were also outperforming. And so we actually realized that if you're a company that is really focused on managing your key material risks, if you understand governance practice, your checks and balances between the board and the executive team, who's looking after minority shareholders, who's looking after other stakeholders. If you understand your environmental footprint and how to minimize it, if you understand the social side of your license to operate and the interactions between your different stakeholders, then we recognized that that was actually a proxy for good risk management more broadly.
Right.
And actually, companies with strong ESG had strong business continuity plans.
Well, that sounds promising. Hopefully, we'll get to talk about that some more in the future. Thank you very much for doing this with me, Mrs. Morrison. Today.
Thank you very much indeed.